The sun had not yet reached its highest point, but the desert air already shimmered with heat. The land stretched wide and merciless, a canvas of dust, thorn brush, and jagged red stone. From afar, the canyon looked still timeless, as if no living thing dared disturb its silence. But close to the shadows at its edge, a young Apache warrior dragged himself across the dirt, leaving a dark trail behind him. Blood seeped from a wound in his side where a bullet had torn through flesh and muscle. Every movement sent waves of fire through his body, and yet he pushed on, hands clawing the ground like a dying animal desperate for shelter. His breathing was ragged, each gasp rattling his chest. Sweat and blood mingled on his skin, staining the earth beneath him. The battle had ended hours earlier, or perhaps it was only minutes. It was difficult to tell. He remembered flashes, the thunder of gunfire, the screaming of horses, the wild cries of his brothers as they fought against overwhelming numbers. He had charged, bow in hand, before the pain tore him from the saddle. When he fell, the world had spun into a blur of dust and noise. Then silence. When he awoke, he was alone and broken. He pressed one hand to his wound, but the blood would not stop. His body trembled with exhaustion, and his vision swam. Still, he dragged himself forward until the shadow of a canyon wall stretched above him, offering refuge from the burning sun. He slumped against a rock, the cool stone biting into his back. For a moment, he simply sat there, staring at the endless horizon beyond. His people were gone. He knew it as surely as he felt the weakness in his limbs. The soldiers would not stop until every Apache in the area was driven away or destroyed. Already, many of the old ways were slipping from memory, swallowed by fire and steel. What strength remained to resist had been cut down in the skirmish that morning. Perhaps some few had escaped into the hills, but he doubted they could gather again. And even if they could, what future remained for them? A deep weariness settled over him, heavier than the pain. He thought of his father, a proud warrior who had taught him to ride, to track, to fight. He thought of his mother, who had sung him to sleep with old songs of the mountains, promising that the land itself would always protect its children. Thought of his little sister, who had laughed like the river in springtime. Where were they now? Were they safe, or scattered like dust in the wind? He would never know. His strength was nearly gone, and there was no one left to tell him. He let his head fall back against the stone, staring at the sliver of sky above. A hawk circled high overhead, its cry sharp and cold. He envied the bird, free to ride the currents of air with no ties, no battles, no wounds. A bitter smile touched his lips. He had once dreamed of being like that hawk, fearless and strong. Now he was broken on the ground, a man reduced to crawling like a snake. "Just let me die here," he whispered, his voice hoarse. The words slipped from him like a prayer, or perhaps a surrender. The canyon echoed faintly with his voice, carrying it back to him in fragments. Die here, die here. It was fitting, he thought. The land had birthed him, fed him, taught him to fight. It would take him back into its dust. No grave was needed. The earth itself would claim his bones. Closing his eyes, he welcomed the darkness pressing in on the edges of his vision. If death was coming, he would not fight it. He was too tired, too broken. He had nothing left to live for. His body slumped further against the rock, and the sound of the desert wrapped around him, the whisper of wind across stone, the distant caw of scavenger birds, the rasp of his own failing breath. Each sound seemed to pull him deeper into silence. His mind drifted between memory and emptiness, caught between life and the shadow waiting just beyond. Somewhere inside, a final thought surfaced, fleeting as a spark. If I fall asleep now, I will not wake again. He did not resist it. He welcomed it. Just let me die here, he repeated, softer this time, and allowed the weight of despair to carry him downward into the waiting dark. The canyon had a way of holding sound, cradling it in its red walls, then letting it fade as if swallowed by the earth itself. When the young Apache's whisper, "Just let me die here," drifted into the air, the stone caught it and sent it back to him like an omen. Afterward, there was only silence. It was not the peaceful silence of a forest at dawn or a meadow at dusk. This was the kind of silence that pressed against the ears, that made the heart aware of its own beating. A silence that could turn cruel at any moment, broken by the cry of a circling bird or the crack of stone under a predator's step. The warrior shifted slightly, groaning as pain surged from his side. His eyes fluttered open, drawn to the shadows around him. The canyon wall above him rose sheer, painted with the scars of time, long black streaks from rain, deep grooves carved by wind and water. The rocks bore witness to centuries, and yet they stood unmoved, eternal. He, by contrast, was nothing but a fading spark. A dry wind hissed through the canyon floor, rattling brittle mesquite branches. Dust lifted in thin, swirling veils. Somewhere, higher up, a lizard darted across a ledge, claws scraping faintly before vanishing into a crack. The warrior listened to each sound with a strange detachment, as if the world were already preparing itself to exist without him. He closed his eyes, and for a moment the stillness wrapped him like a blanket. His mind drifted into half-dreams, the pounding of hooves on desert soil, the laughter of his sister as she chased butterflies, the crackle of fire in the village at night. But the vision slipped away like water between his fingers. What remained was only the weight of his body, the ache of thirst in his throat, and the dull throb of blood pulsing from his wound. He tried to swallow, but his mouth was dry as stone. His lips cracked when he licked them. The skin of his hands, stained dark with dried blood, trembled when he lifted them to his face. He thought of water-clear, cold water from the mountain streams. He could almost hear it rushing over rocks, calling to him, but it was only memory. The canyon gave him nothing but silence. Overhead, a hawk wheeled in slow circles. It had returned, patient as death itself. Each cry of the bird seemed sharper, closer. He knew what it waited for. When his body grew still enough, when the last breath rattled out of him, the scavengers would come. First the small ones, coyotes, perhaps a fox. Then the winged ones, bold under the sun. The earth took everything back, and the canyon bore. Witness. The warrior let his head fall sideways, pressing his cheek to the gritty ground. From this angle, the world looked different. He could see the ants marching in steady lines, carrying fragments of leaves back to their hidden places. Life carried on, unbothered by his suffering. The ants would live, breed, die, and another line would replace them. Long after he was gone, that thought should have filled him with despair, but instead it left him hollow. What was one life compared to the endless rhythm of the desert? Perhaps it was better this way. His death would be a small offering, nothing more. A howl broke the silence, distant but clear. Coyotes. Their voices rose in eerie harmony, drifting through the canyon like ghost song. The warrior opened his eyes again, listening. He had heard those voices countless times before, around campfires, during hunts, on night watches. They had always sounded wild, untamable. Now they sounded like a funeral dirge. His funeral dirge. The sound faded, replaced once more by stillness. Darkness crept again at the edges of his vision, not with violence, but with the quiet persistence of nightfall. The warrior let out a long, slow breath. He did not resist. The canyon would keep him. And in that moment, as he surrendered to silence, he thought of his mother's voice. A faint memory, a song she used to sing when he was a child frightened of the dark. He could almost hear it, soft and low, threading through the canyon stillness. For the first time in hours, his face softened, the shadow of peace passing over it. But the song was not only memory. Faint, almost too faint to believe, a voice drifted through the canyon. It was not the wind. It was not his mind playing tricks. It was a woman's voice, carrying notes that rose and fell like the current of a river. The silence of the canyon was broken. At first, he thought the voice was only another dream. The wounded Apache lay half-conscious against the canyon wall, his breath shallow, his body trembling as fever crept into his blood. But the sound did not fade. It grew clearer, stronger. Drifting between the stones, a woman's voice, carrying a melody as fragile as it was steady. He forced his eyes open. The world swam in blurs of red and gold, but through the haze he saw movement at the canyon's edge. A figure was making her way down the rocky path, careful and deliberate, as if she knew the canyon could turn treacherous with one wrong step. She was not Apache. Even in his weakened state, he could tell. Her dress, worn but sturdy, was made of cloth dyed in muted colors, unlike the hides his people used. Her hair, long and dark, was braided loosely, with strands slipping free in the wind. She carried a small bundle slung over one shoulder, and her hands were empty, palms open, as though she wished to show she carried no weapon. The warrior's instinct stirred. He wanted to rise to reach for the knife at his belt, but his body betrayed him. His hand twitched and then fell limp. All he could do was watch as the woman drew closer. Her step slowed when she saw him. For a moment she froze, her face unreadable. In her eyes he expected to see fear or worse, contempt. That was what most outsiders carried when they looked at an Apache. Yet what he saw instead was something different. Caution, yes, but also sorrow. The woman knelt a few paces away. Studying him, the canyon held its breath. The hawks still circled high above, and somewhere in the distance, the coyotes gave another mournful cry. But here, between them, there was only stillness. He rasped out words, though they tore his throat. "Raw, leave me." His voice was no louder than the rustle of wind through the grass. "Go. Nothing here but death." For a long moment she did not move. Then she shook her head, slowly. Her braid slipped forward over her shoulder. She unwrapped the bundle she carried, revealing a waterskin and a small cloth bag. She held up the waterskin, tilting it slightly so he could hear the faint slosh inside. Water. Precious, clear water. His throat clenched with need, but pride stiffened what little remained of his will. He turned his face away. "Go," he whispered again, though the word was weaker this time. "No reason to help me. Let the earth take me." Still, she did not leave. Instead, she sat cross-legged on the ground, not too near, but not retreating either. She placed the waterskin in front of her and rested her hands on her lap. The melody he had heard earlier slipped from her lips once more, quieter now, but steady. Her voice was not perfect. It carried cracks and rough edges, as though it had weathered storms. Yet it was strong in a way he did not expect. The song wove into the canyon air, softening its harsh silence. The warrior closed his eyes. He told himself he did not care. He told himself the song meant nothing. And yet, his heart stirred. For the first time since the battle, the darkness, pressing in on him, eased, just slightly, as though the song held it at bay. When he opened his eyes again, the woman was watching him. Her gaze was calm, unwavering, but not demanding. She made no move to force the water upon him. She only sang. He frowned, confused. Outsiders came with guns, with chains, with the fire that destroyed villages. They did not come with songs. And yet here she was, alone, singing to a dying Apache warrior. "Why?" he rasped, his voice cracking. "Why stay?" The woman tilted her head, her song fading into silence. For the first time, she spoke. Her words were accented, but clear. "No one should die alone," she said simply. The canyon seemed to shift at those words. The silence that had been a tomb moments before now felt less final, less certain. The warrior's chest rose and fell. With a shaky breath, he wanted to tell her she was foolish, that he was already half dead, and nothing she did could change that. But the words would not form. All he could do was stare, torn between despair and something he had not felt in dazed curiosity. Stranger reached forward, not touching him, but placing the water skin within his reach. Then she leaned back, folding her hands once more. She would not force him. But she would not leave, and for the first time since he had whispered for death, the warrior wondered if perhaps the canyon had other plans for him. The Apache's eyes lingered on the water skin where she had set it within his reach. He could hear the faint swish of liquid inside, imagine the coolness of it sliding down his parched throat, feel the relief it would bring to his cracked lips and burning chest. Yet he did not move toward it. Pride and despair kept him frozen. "Drink," the woman urged softly. Her voice was not commanding, only patient. She nudged the skin closer with her fingertips, then withdrew her hand, giving him space. His answer came with a rough cough, flecks of red at the corner of his lips. "No," he rasped, "not for me." He shifted, turning his face toward the canyon wall as if to block her from sight. "My time is done. Water is wasted on dying men." She was quiet for a while. The canyon wind whispered between them, rattling the brittle brush, carrying the faint cry of the hawk above. Finally, she said, "If you were ready for death, you would not have crawled here." He flinched, though whether from pain or truth, even he did not know. His mind returned to the desperate crawl through the dust and stone, the burning in his lungs, the pounding in his heart that had kept him moving though every step was agony. Had it been instinct? Or some stubborn ember deep within refusing to be extinguished? He did not want to believe it. To hope, even a little, was more painful than surrender. "I fought," he whispered, his eyes closing again. "I lost. My people are scattered. My blood stains the earth. What is left for me?" His voice cracked, raw with grief. "Better I give myself to silence." The woman listened, her gaze steady. She did not argue immediately. Instead, she reached into her cloth bag and pulled out a strip of dried meat, chewing a piece slowly before setting another on a stone near him. The act was simple, unspoken. Sustenance offered, not forced. Still, he turned his head away. The smell of food only made his stomach twist with weakness. His refusal was not only stubbornness, it was conviction. To eat, to drink, was to admit. A will to live, and he could not allow himself that weakness. "Go back," he murmured, his voice thin. "The soldiers hunt still. If they find you here—" He trailed off, breath shuddering. Her expression flickered, something like shadow crossed her face, but it was gone in an instant. "I am not afraid of soldiers," she said. Then, after a pause, she added, "And I am not afraid of you." That surprised him more than he cared to admit. His people had long been painted as enemies, savages, beasts to be feared. To hear a woman from outside say otherwise unsettled something deep inside him. But he buried the thought quickly, clutching to the only shield he had left, despair. "Then you are a fool," he muttered. She did not bristle. Instead, her lips curved into the faintest smile, though her eyes remained serious. "Perhaps. But even fools can carry songs." And with that, she began to sing again. The melody was low, almost like a hum, weaving gently through the canyon air. It was not loud, not insistent. It was the kind of sound that seeped past walls built by pain, slipping quietly into the cracks. Her voice wavered in places, but there was strength in the persistence. In the way she gave herself to the song without fear of silence swallowing it, the Apache closed his eyes, telling himself he did not want to listen. Yet his ears betrayed him, leaning toward the sound. It carried memories he had buried, his mother's lullabies, the chants of warriors around the fire, the laughter of his people beneath the stars. Each note brushed against those memories, stirring embers he had sworn were dead. His chest ached. But this time the pain was not only from the wound. It was the ache of something returning, something he had not felt since before the battle. Longing. He clenched his jaw, forcing the feeling down. "Your song will not change what has been lost," he said, though his voice trembled. The woman did not stop singing. She closed her eyes, letting the canyon carry her voice, as if she knew the silence itself needed breaking. The warrior lay back against the stone, torn between anger, grief, and the faintest flicker of hope. He refused the water, refused the food, but he could not refuse the song. Not yet. The canyon walls had always been cruel witnesses, silent, unyielding, stained with the echoes of violence. But now they bore something different, a melody, fragile yet insistent. Threading through the still air, the woman's voice rose softly. Each note carried on the wind like smoke rising from a fire. It was not the kind of song sung for performance or pride. It was a song sung to comfort, to remind the heart that it still beat. She sang as though the canyon were listening with him, as though the stone itself might soften if given enough sound. Apache warrior lay motionless, his body heavy as stone, his mind suspended between waking and fading. At first, he resisted the song. He told himself it was meaningless, just a woman's breath carried on the air. He had already chosen death. Yet the melody did not demand. It waited, it lingered, seeping into the cracks of his despair. Something stirred within him, memory. Faint at first, then sharper dot he was a child again, lying beneath a canopy of stars. His mother's voice rose beside the fire, low and soothing, telling the mountains to guard their people through the night. Her voice had carried a strength beyond words, a promise that even in darkness, the land was alive and listening. The woman's song in the canyon was not the same melody, yet it carried the same weight. It reminded him of warmth, of protection, of a world before lost. His throat tightened. He pressed his blood-stained hand against his wound, as though he could shield himself from the ache the song awakened. He wanted to block it out, but instead it filled him. The hawk overhead cried once, sharp and shrill. The song answered it, flowing upward, rising with the sound until even the birds seemed silenced. The coyotes that had howled before grew quiet. For a moment, the canyon belonged only to her voice. The warrior's lips parted, his breath uneven. He had not realized tears had gathered in his eyes until one slid down his cheek, tracing a path through the dirt and sweat. He turned his face away quickly, ashamed. He was Apache, born to endure, to fight. Tears were not for warriors, they were for children. Yet the song stripped him bare, reducing him to something more human than warrior, something he had long forgotten he still was. The woman's eyes remained closed as she sang, as if she was somewhere else entirely. Perhaps she was remembering her own family, her own losses. Perhaps her song was not only for him, but for herself as well. That thought unsettled him. How could a stranger's sorrow find harmony with his own? And yet it did. His voice came, out rough, breaking the song's spell. "Stop," he whispered, but she did not stop. Her voice swelled, not louder, but steadier, like a stream finding strength as it flowed downhill. The canyon carried it back to him, surrounding him from all sides, making it impossible to escape. He pressed his palms to his ears, but even then, the sound found its way in. It was not only in his ears, it was in his chest, in the hollow place where despair had been carved deep. The melody filled that hollow, and for the first time since the battle, he felt something flicker inside him. not joy, not even hope, but life. His hands slipped away from his ears, falling limp at his sides. His chest rose in a trembling breath. His eyes opened slowly, turning toward her. She was still singing, her face serene, her body still as stone, except for the rise and fall of her breath. And then he realized her song was not meant to deny his pain. It did not pretend the loss was gone. It carried sorrow within it, but also endurance. It said, yes, the world wounds, but still there is breath. Still, there is song. Got his lips trembled, words forming without thought. Why? He asked hoarsely. Why sing? For me? The woman opened her eyes at last, the final notes of her melody fading into silence. She met his gaze, and though her face was tired, her eyes carried a quiet strength. Because even the broken must be reminded, she said softly, that they are still alive. The canyon seemed to exhale with her words. The silence that followed was no longer suffocating. It was vast, open, waiting. The Apache closed his eyes again, not to surrender this time, but to listen to the echo of her song as it lingered in his heart. For the first time, death did not seem so near. Night came slowly to the canyon, the kind of twilight that stretched shadows long across the rock and painted the world in copper and violet. The Apache warrior had drifted in and out of fever, but the woman's song had anchored him. Even when sleep tugged at his body, he could still hear it soft, persistent, like a stream running beneath the earth. When he woke again, the stars had scattered across the sky, burning cold and eternal. A small fire crackled a few paces away, its glow throwing golden light against the stone. The woman sat beside it, head bowed, humming quietly while she worked at something in her lap. He smelled the faint aroma of herbs and smoke, and for a moment he thought he was back in his mother's lodge, listening to her grind roots for medicine. The ache in his chest tightened. Memory, unbidden, pulled him into the past. He was a boy. Again, running barefoot through the grass with his sister chasing behind him. Their father's voice rang across the meadow, sharp but proud, calling them back before nightfall. He remembered the warmth of the fire, the sound of drums carrying across the camp. The way stories rose into the night like sparks, he remembered. The pride of standing tall when his bow first struck true, the strength of belonging to a people who carried the mountains in their blood. That life felt like another world now. War had scattered them. Soldiers had driven them from their homes, cutting the land into pieces, breaking the circle of their people. The warrior had thought all of that was gone. Ashes, silence, emptiness. But the woman's song, the sound of her voice carried against the canyon walls, had dug into his heart like a hand stirring coals beneath ash. And now, he realized with a jolt, the fire was not entirely dead. His breath shuddered. He lifted his hand from his wound and stared at the dark stains across his skin. He had seen warriors die from wounds less grave than his. By all reason, he should already have crossed into the spirit world. And yet, he breathed still. The fire in his chest, faint as it was, had not gone out. The woman noticed his stirring. She set aside her work and reached for the waterskin, tilting it toward him without a word. He hesitated. His pride fought against his body's need, and his despair whispered that he had no reason to drink. Yet the song still lingered inside. Him, tugging at something older than despair. His people had always believed that to draw breath was to carry responsibility to the land, to the ancestors, to those yet unborn. Had he forgotten that truth so easily? With a trembling hand, he reached forward. His fingers brushed the skin of the waterskin, cool against his heat. Slowly, as if admitting defeat, he drew it closer. The woman said nothing. She only watched, her face calm, patient. He lifted the waterskin to his lips and drank. The water was warm from the desert day, but to him it was as sweet as mountain spring. It slid down his throat, quenching the fire of thirst, and for a moment he closed his eyes, savoring it. When he lowered the skin, his chest rose and fell with a deeper breath. He caught her gaze and found no triumph there, no gloating at his. Surrender. Only quiet relief, as though she had known all along that this moment would come. You sing like. He paused, searching for words. His voice cracked, heavy with memory. Like my mother, she sang to keep the night away. The woman tilted her head, her expression softening. Then perhaps, she said gently, her song has found its way back to you. Her words struck him harder than he expected. He pressed. His hand to his chest, not to his wound this time, but to the place where his heartbeat thudded, faint yet steady. He was alive. Wounded, broken, perhaps hunted still, but alive. The fire of his people had not been extinguished. His breath was proof. For the first time since the battle, the Apache lifted his head, staring at the stars above the canyon rim. They seemed brighter. Tonight, sharper, as though they too bore witness. His voice, though faint, carried conviction he had thought lost. Perhaps? Not yet, he whispered. The woman smiled, not wide, but deep enough to reach her eyes. She added no words. She did not need to. The canyon itself seemed to breathe with them, silence now heavy not with death, but with possibility. The dawn broke slow over the canyon, light spilling across the ridges in pale gold. Shadows retreated inch by inch, and the stones, cold from the night, warmed beneath the sun's return. The Apache stirred at the change, blinking against the brightness. Pain greeted him, sharp as ever, but the despair that had weighed like stone on his chest no longer pressed so heavily. He shifted, propping himself against the canyon wall. The effort left him trembling, but he did not fall back. His body still bore weakness, but his spirit felt different, stirred, restless, unwilling to sink again into silence. The woman knelt near the fire, grinding dried leaves into powder with a smooth stone. She glanced up as he moved, her eyes steady. "You are awake," she said simply, her voice neither surprised nor triumphant. He grunted softly in reply, his gaze drifting to the horizon beyond the canyon's mouth. The world was still there, vast and unbroken. For the first time since the battle, he felt a tug in his chest, not toward the earth below, but toward that horizon dot. She offered him a bundle of herbs mixed with water in a small cloth. "For the fever," she said. He hesitated. Once he would have refused, clinging to despair as his only certainty, but he had already drunk her water. He had already let her song into his heart. To refuse now would be a lie against himself. He reached out, his fingers brushing hers briefly as he took the bundle. The touch startled him, a reminder that he was not a ghost yet, but a man, flesh and blood. He swallowed the bitter mixture, grimacing, then leaned back against the stone. "Why do you stay?" he asked at last, his voice rough but clearer than the night before. She paused, then said, "Because the world takes enough without me giving more to its hunger." She looked at him, her gaze unwavering. "And because you are not finished, though you think you are." Her certainty unsettled him. He had been so sure his story had ended in the dust of that battlefield. Yet here she sat, speaking of continuance as if it were written on the wind. He looked down at his hand, scarred, blood-stained, trembling with weakness. Once they had held a bow, drawn it with the strength of youth and purpose. Once they had grasped reins, guided his horse across endless plains. Now they shook like those of an old man. What kind of life could such hands hold? His despair rose again, but alongside it came the memory of her song, the way it had threaded through the canyon, softening stone and stirring ashes. He could still feel its echo inside him, a reminder that even in ruin there could be voice. Perhaps. He began slowly, uncertain even of his own words. Perhaps the earth has not finished with me." The woman did not smile, not in triumph, but in acknowledgment. She dipped her head slightly, as though honoring a decision he alone had the right to make. The Apache drew a deeper breath, though it pained him. He felt the wound burn, felt his body's frailty, yet also felt the quiet beat of his heart. Each thud seemed louder than the last, insistent, unwilling to be silenced. He thought of his people, not only those who had fallen, but those who might yet live, scattered and hidden in the mountains. He thought of the children who still carried the songs of their mothers, who still laughed like rivers in spring. He thought of the land itself, waiting for those who would not abandon it. He clenched his jaw, his voice firmer now. "I will not die here." The words were not shouted, but the canyon seemed to hear them, carrying them back to him in quiet echo. "Not die here. Not die here." The woman rose and tended the fire, adding more kindling. She did not answer, but he caught the faint lift of her shoulders, the smallest exhale of relief. For the first time since the battle, he closed his eyes not to surrender, but to rest. His body needed time, but his spirit had made its choice. He would endure. He would rise again. The silence of the canyon was no longer a tomb. It was a cradle, holding the fragile but undeniable spark of life. Days passed in the canyon, measured not by hours but by small victories. At first he could only sip water and endure the fever's grip while the woman tended the fire and sang. Then he managed to chew dried meat, though it sat heavy in his stomach. Each step forward felt like an insult to death itself, and he clung to them with quiet defiance. His wound slowly sealed under her care. She cleaned it daily with water and herbs, her hands steady, unflinching. He had expected her to shrink from the blood from the scar that stretched jagged across his side, but she treated it with the same patience she gave to tending the fire or grinding roots. To her, it seemed, he was not a defeated enemy, not a savage, not a dying man, only another soul in need of care. The Apache studied her in silence. He did not ask her story, not yet. But he read shadows in her eyes, the way her gaze lingered too long on the horizon, the way her voice sometimes trembled before she steadied it again. She had lost something too, though she carried it differently. Perhaps that was why she had stayed, because grief recognized itself. On the fourth morning he tried to stand. The effort sent fire lancing through his side, and his legs buckled beneath him. He fell hard to one knee, the taste of dust in his mouth. Anger flared at his weakness, at the soldiers who had taken his people, at the canyon itself for bearing witness to his humiliation. But then the woman's voice broke the silence. She did not scold or pity. She only began to hum, the same melody she had sung on the first night. The sound steadied him more than her hands could have. He gritted his teeth, pressed one palm to the stone, and forced himself upright again. His legs shook, but they held. He stood there trembling, chest heaving, staring at the canyon rim lit with the rising sun. For the first time since his fall from the horse, he was not on the ground. He was standing, alive. A rough laugh broke from his throat, startled and sharp. It hurt, but it was real. The woman's lips curved slightly, her eyes glinting with quiet pride. In that moment, he knew. He had chosen, not merely to survive another hour, but to live. When the sun climbed higher, casting light over both of them, he turned to her. His voice was low, but steady. "Your song," he said. "It gave me back my spirit." She shook her head. The spirit was never gone. It only needed to be reminded. Her words settled in him like seeds. He thought of the fires of his people, scattered but not extinguished. He thought of the children who would need stories, songs, warriors. He thought of the land that still waited for footsteps and laughter. Perhaps he was only one man, wounded and scarred, but he was still part of that circle. He placed his hand over his chest, feeling the steady beat beneath his ribs. Once he had begged the canyon to let him die. Now he whispered a vow into its silence. I will live. For them, for what remains. The canyon carried his words back to him, not as mockery but as affirmation. Live, live, lived out. The woman watched him, then rose to stand beside him. Their eyes met, and in that meeting there was no need for thanks, no need for questions. She had given him her song. He had given himself a reason. That was enough. Together they looked toward the mouth of the canyon, where the world stretched wide, waiting. His body still ached, his steps would be slow, and the path ahead uncertain. But the fire within him burned again, fragile yet fierce. The dawn spilled brighter, gilding the stone, turning the desert from barren to sacred. For the first time, he did not see the land as his grave. He saw it as the beginning of another journey. What had once been a death wish had become a vow, to live, to endure, to protect the song that had reminded him of life. And with the rising sun, he took his first step forward.